Hot. Cheers. So, hello lovely people. Today I am doing a casual chat / interview with my dad. This is my dad.
Hey up.
You want to introduce yourself?
I'm her dad.
No, but what's your name? What's your name?
My name is Mark Maviti. I'm a Scorpio. Yeah, I'm Mark. 3rd generation bike rider, so Kira's 4th generation. So my granddad raced, my dad raced, obviously I raced a bit, and now Kira's...
I attempt to race.
Yeah.
So I've just prepared some questions for you that I think the viewers might be interested in. So I just thought I would start with, how did you start cycling?
My dad would always talk about the races he used to do. When we were little, we used to go caravanning a lot, and we'd be, and it's something I do to you, we'd be driving along the road, towing the caravan, and my dad would say, "Oh, I rode a road race up along here, and it went up there." And I still do it now. You know, we're going, I don't know, up the A1 or something. I go, "It's the time trial course, and they start in that lay-by," and you know, and every time we drive down there, I do that. So it was something we spoke about a lot, and you know, spoke about my granddad racing. What didn't happen is I didn't get bought bikes and stuff. I had to sort of buy my own and get into it that way. But once I did start, I had some good advice and whatnot. But it wasn't like I wasn't led into it in the way perhaps you were.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
What was your first bike?
Oh, well, first proper bike, I had...
like racing bike?
Okay, well, I had a bike called an EA Bolt, Reynolds 531 tubing. Which was in the garage, and it was my dad had it. It was like his old winter bike, and he used to ride to work on it. And I got that out of the shed. He hadn't used it for a couple of years, and I sort of cleaned it up and started riding that. And we did some long rides, me and some of my mates. We were living in sort of on the Wirral then, and we sort of rode into North Wales and stuff. Did a load of riding, and then I got a bike for that Christmas, which was an Atala. It's an Italian make.
So how old were you then?
16.
16.
Yeah. I never really rode until I was 16. Yeah.
So Mum's been cycling longer than you?
Yep.
Oh, nice.
Because she's slower.
I hope you tell her that. No, I'm not going to tell her. Who is faster?
Who? Now?
Out of me and you.
Oh, now it's definitely you, mate. Yeah. I sort of tried to encourage Kira into racing, and I can remember. Actually, there's a little picture here. That little bike there, it's not very clear, but it's a little 650 wheel thing. I remember taking her for a ride. There's a really nice loop near here, which is like 13.5 miles. Yeah. And I can remember taking you out for rides on that, and you'd basically moan the whole way. So she'd be like 4 bike lengths behind me until we got about 3 miles from home, and I'd say, "Oh, it's only 3 miles now." And then I'd be hanging on to you. But you did grow to love it, you know, you did grow to love it.
Well, I still feel like that, like the first half of bike rides is often harder than the last half. I'm
going to quote Gilbert O'Sullivan here. Houdini said that to get out of bed was the hardest thing that he could do. And what he meant by that was getting started. That's always the difficult bit. So what I used to do, I don't know what you do, what I used to do is basically not think about anything. I would just throw my feet out of the bed, splash water on my face, put my cycling kit on, and get on my bike and start riding. I'd probably be 5 or 6 miles up the roads before I even started thinking about anything. And that way, you're training. Yeah.
I mean, for me, the way I prepare for a ride is I probably lay out my kit the night before, or like have it ready so that there's hardly any steps between bed and actually riding. You try and minimise those steps by preparing beforehand. You know. You can prep your bottles, you can prep everything. Yeah. Pump your tyres up the night before.
Yeah. Well, what I used to do, I'd even go a stage further than that. So basically, as I was coming in from the ride, I used to strip my gear off straight into the washing machine. The bike would be clean, prepped, whatever, tyres ready and everything. So basically, I was leaving everything ready to go the next time I had a couple of sets of kit. So one set would be in the wash and the next set would be ready to go. So I didn't even have to think about preparing the night before, because everything was already where it needed to be.
There. Okay, cool. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you got into racing, what sort of racing you did?
Sort of classic way when I was young was you go and ride Club 10s and stuff, which is kind of how you started really. and I joined a club called Port Sunlight Wheelers. I was sort of riding with those people, and then shortly thereafter I started riding, you know, Birkenhead Park. There was a famous, well, I don't know if they still do it, there's a circuit race there. And my dad would be there with me, and he met some of his old buddies who used to ride. My dad rode for a club called Liverpool Mercury. He met these old cycling buddies, and they said, oh, you know, these fellas had been in a club called North Wirral Velo. And they said, well, let's restart North Wirral Velo. So that's how North Wirral Velo sort of started again. It later, Chris Boardman joined later on, and got some sponsorship for it, and it became a sort of super club. But it started out as an ordinary
just a normal club.
Yeah.
So how has sort of like cycling in terms of British cycling changed from then to now? Because now obviously there's a lot of teams. You know, was it pretty much just all clubs then, or were they, you know, how did it work?
There were no, I mean, there was a separate professional and amateur category, and with the greatest of respect, because some fantastic pro riders, but the actual pro scene was quite limited. There were very few road races. It was mostly crits for the pros. For the amateurs, it was all clubs, but what they did, and there was actually BC, British Cycling as was, or BCF it was called then, they were very strict on the amateurism thing, so down to things like you couldn't have logos on your shoes or your shorts, they had to be plain, plain socks, all that. You couldn't have like a team. So what happened is, small clubs would be taken over by somebody who had a bit of money, and they'd then get some riders in. It was like a way of supporting elite, what would be now elite road riders, because it actually was against the rules to do it, you know, in those days. So Manchester Wheelers was the famous one. They were sponsored by Truman Steel. There was a club in name only that was from near here called St Neots, and they were called St Neots Harry Quinn, and they had like 4 riders, and they were all like top riders. And North Wirral Velo later on got sponsored by Kodak, and Chris Boardman was there, and that was became almost like a pro team that you'd sort of recognise today, but it wasn't. You know, that wasn't the usual thing. No.
I'm going to ask you a little bit about women's cycling now.
Right.
So, obviously, you sort of saw Mum race and all that sort of thing, and you've seen me race. You know, can you talk about like what the differences are between obviously her racing and me racing, from your perspective?
Well, I mean, the women's racing was always, it seemed to me like a bit of an afterthought. So your mum used to come to races with me, and she always rode a bike, and she rode some Club 10s, and actually she turned out to be quite quick, you know. And, you know, we bought her some slightly better equipment, although we never went overboard on that, and she rode a lot of time trials. And at the time, there was a national road race series where there would be about, I don't know, maybe 30, 40 riders, but basically you had a hardcore of maybe 20 that were any good and knew what they were doing, and the rest were just sort of people like your mum, who was fit and had ridden time trials but didn't have much clue about anything else.
I guess, I mean, Mum was saying when I spoke to her that she didn't really learn how to ride in a bunch. She didn't really, there was no real coaching or like development.
No, there was no coaching.
So I definitely think that's massively changed. You know, when I was growing up, there were RSRs every month, which were like regional schools of racing. So basically, you'd go and learn how to ride on a wheel, ride in a group. You'd learn how racing worked, and I think that's been the benefit to me.
Well, I mean, if you imagine, there probably wasn't even one women's road race a week. Let's say there was one women's road race a week, and wherever it was, you had to travel to it. And because there weren't enough women, it would be elite first, second, third, fourth. You know, so as a fourth cat starting out, it was really difficult to break into that. You know, to doing that. So your mum rode, I don't know, she probably only rode half a dozen road races in her entire career. She rode a bit of track. Because we both ended up riding for the Zenith in Leicester, and you know we had access to Saffron Lane, and we trained there and got coached there. With our coach Jan Bassett, and she, you know, taught Ghislaine, your mum, how to ride. But the thing is, she hadn't really started riding bunches and stuff until she was in her 20s, and that was really, she struggled with that. She struggled with that,
I mean, it's not to say that you can't learn once you pass the sort of 20s, but I definitely think that like the younger you are, the more you kind of absorb it. I don't know if that's right.
Yeah, and I think
it takes a bit more.
I think the other thing is, coaching these days is much better thought out. So, you know, they'd put people in the situation where you're riding in a group and then you're riding on a circuit and you're doing corners together and stuff like that.
Yeah, because I mean, training's changed quite a lot, hasn't it, since...
Well, you know. I mean, you know, it's going back to men's racing, but if you think about when I started racing, you'd go out on the club run, so all right, you'd learn how to ride in a group, and then you'd start doing road races, and what would happen is you'd get dropped at first, and then gradually you'd sort of hang on a bit longer and you'd learn, you know, how to get on the wheel properly and all the rest of it, and people would shout at you as well. And you'd sort of absorb it. Well, now you see people come from something like triathlon, or they get the coaching manual and they get really fit and they've got really good physical condition, but they haven't got a clue what they're doing. But there is coaching now, that gap's filled. You know, you're not going in not knowing what you're doing and then you have to learn. You sort of have a clue.
And especially like, even with stuff like YouTube and stuff, and GCN, you can learn so much about cycling just from the internet, or just from, you know, what you read online. I mean, my boyfriend Jake, he said to me that he's pretty much learned how to be a cyclist through like GCN and videos.
You have a boyfriend, and I was not informed.
You know I have a boyfriend.
Yeah. No, he's very nice, Jake. You better not be. No, he's all right. Anyway, yeah, lost it.
Thank you for tuning in to part 1 of the Q&A with my dad. If you want to see, which I know you do, part 2, it will be coming out tomorrow, where you can find out things such as my dad's most embarrassing moment. And trust me, it is kind of cringe. So, see you tomorrow. Be sure to risk it for a biscuit and have an awesome day. Boo!